Have you ever stopped to wonder how an Islamic ruling is actually made? We hear the final answer all the time. This is okay, that isn't. But today, we are pulling back the curtain. We're going to look at the shared operating system, that fundamental logic that all the major schools of thought use to get to their conclusions. So let's dive in. And honestly, this question has never been more important. Think about it. We are just swimming in information. You've got loud, confident voices on social media. You've got AI chatbots giving answers. Without some kind of framework, it is so easy to get lost. So how do you cut through all that noise? How do you find the real substance? And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. This is the core problem we're trying to solve. If you only memorize what's halal or what's haram, you're kind of left vulnerable, right? The real power, the real confidence comes from understanding the process, the how and the why a ruling was reached in the first place. And that is exactly our focus today. All right, so first things first, we need to get two key terms down. Think of it this way. Fiqh is like the final dish you get at a restaurant. It's the ruling itself, what you do. But usul al-fiqh, now that is the recipe. It's the method, the principles, the whole proof path that shows you how they made it. A ruling is only as legitimate as the strength of its recipe. So how does that recipe, that method, actually work? Well, let's look at the blueprint, the core transaction that pretty much all the major schools of thought agree on for creating a valid ruling. It's really a four-part process. It all starts with a qualified scholar. Think of them as the processor. They take the evidence, that's the input, from the Quran, from the Sunnah. Then comes this really critical step, analyzing the indication, figuring out, okay, what does this piece of evidence actually mean? And only then, after all that, do you get to the ruling, the final output. And here's something crucial. When you see scholars disagreeing, it's almost always happening back at step 2 or 3. They're debating the evidence or its meaning, not because someone is just making stuff up. But here's the thing. Before a ruling even applies to anyone, there's this whole other layer we have to look at. It's like a system of checks and balances, almost like the law's own laws of physics, that determine who the ruling is even for. And this idea has a name, taklif, or legal responsibility. You can think of it as the system's very first filter. It asks the question, is this person even legally accountable in this situation? Because a ruling isn't just some abstract idea floating out in space. For it to matter, it has to apply to a specific person under very specific conditions. So what are those conditions? Well, they're actually pretty intuitive, common sense stuff. The system checks, is the person of sound mind? Have they reached the age of maturity? Do they actually have the physical or financial ability to do what's being asked? And maybe one of the most important ones, did they even get the memo? Has the knowledge of the ruling even reached them? If these boxes aren't ticked, the whole conversation about accountability changes. Now, let's get even more precise, because rulings actually come in two different flavors. First, you have the taklifi ruling. That's the moral demand, like you should pray. But then you have the wadi ruling. That's the structural layer, the rules of the game. Like, your prayer is only valid if you perform ablution first. One is the what, the other is the how. And you know what? So many arguments online happen because people are mixing these two up. And this chart lays it all out perfectly. On the left, you see that spectrum of moral demands. It's way more nuanced than just allowed or forbidden, right? But check out the right side. These are the structural gears. What triggers a ruling to begin with? The conditions required for it to be valid, and even things that could block it from being valid. Getting this separation is a total game changer. It shows you how something could be morally fine, but structurally invalid. It just makes you so much harder to confuse. Okay, so we know a ruling applies to a specific person, and we know what kind of ruling it is. But how does a scholar actually go from a piece of evidence to a conclusion? Well, they have a specific toolkit for that, because as we're about to see, not all proofs are created equal. The answer to that? Of course not. It's a hard no. And this is so fundamental. Islamic legal reasoning has a built-in hierarchy for weighing evidence, and this is what brings so much precision to the whole process. So the very first level of analysis is a two-part check. First, you've got thubut, which is all about authenticity. It's asking, how reliably did this text even get to us? Is the chain solid? Second, you have dalala, and this is about clarity. How clear is the meaning? Is it a direct, unambiguous command, or is there some wiggle room for interpretation? And that brings us to this critical distinction, qat'i versus zani. A qat'i proof is definitive. It's like a locked door. The source is certain, the meaning is certain, there's only one way to interpret it. Debate is closed. But a zani proof, that's probable. It's more like a path with a few valid forks in the road. Maybe the source is strong, but not 100% airtight, or more often, the text itself has a legitimate range of meanings. And this is where most valid, respected scholarly differences come from. And this is really the big takeaway here. Recognizing when an issue is zani isn't a weakness. It's a sign of incredible intellectual precision. It's admitting that you're not claiming absolute certainty on the matter. And that fosters a sense of humility, which is, a pretty central part of the whole religion. So what about all the new problems? Stuff the texts don't mention directly. I don't know, like vaping or cryptocurrency? This is where a tool called qiyas, or analogy, comes in. It's the engine that keeps the law alive and relevant. Scholars look for the effective cause of a ruling in the original texts, like, say, the intoxicating effect of wine, and then they see if that same cause exists in the new thing. If it does, well, the ruling can be extended. Okay, so we've seen the mechanics, the checks and balances, the scholar's toolkit, but why? What is the ultimate point of this incredibly detailed, sophisticated system? Let's zoom out and look at the big picture. The entire system, the whole shebang, is designed to achieve what are known as the maqasid, or the core objectives of the law. And these are the 5 essentials that the law is there to protect and preserve: your faith, your life, your mind, your family, and your wealth. This just shows that the system isn't random, it's not arbitrary. It's fundamentally built on a foundation of seeking mercy and preventing harm. So, after going through this shared foundation, what does this mean for you? Well, you've just received a massive upgrade. You're no longer just a passive consumer of rulings. You are now an informed observer who actually understands the architecture behind them. You now have the tools to bring some serious clarity to conversations. When a debate kicks off, you can immediately ask, wait a second, what layer are we even on here? Are we talking about a moral command, or are we really talking about a structural condition for something to be valid? And that's not all. You can also ask the right questions about the evidence itself. You can probe and ask, okay, is the proof you're using here definitive, something that closes the conversation? Or is it probable, an area where different views might actually be legitimate? And all of this leads to what is maybe the most powerful takeaway of all. You can now recognize where and why valid scholarly disagreement is not only possible, but expected. You'll understand it's not chaos. It's a feature, not a bug, of a sophisticated system designed to handle probable evidence. And let's end on this thought. Being able to genuinely say, you know what, I understand why scholars differed on this. That sentence is more than just an academic point. It's a shield. It protects you from the arrogance of thinking your view is the only possible one, and it protects you from the kind of extremism that grows in the soil of false certainty. And that right there is the beginning of wisdom.